All right. Hey there. So Casey Joyner, Scenic Sotheby's, and you are locked into a good one. We are going to break down Q2 2025 here on the coast. I'm locked in place, water, coffee. This is going to be a long video. Okay. So what I'm going to tell you is we're going to timestamp it below. So I know that about 70% of our viewers watch on TV. So this might be one to have on in the background while you're on the treadmill, whatever you do out there. But this is going to be the most comprehensive look at the numbers across the board. And we're going to go into individual communities, break down 38 East versus West, Destin, Miramar Beach, tell you the numbers. Again, our goal on this channel is to make our viewers the most educated in the market. So when the neighbors come up to you and start telling you how things are, you know the numbers, and this is the spot where you can get them. So I'm locked in. I'm going to give them to you. Just sit back and relax. We're going to go through each segment, and you're going to know everything you need to know by the end of this. I hope you're doing great. Thank you for tuning in with us. And I'm just going to get right into it. And we're going to start with, let's start with 38. So we're going to start with 38 East. I'm going to throw it up there on the board, and then I'm going to flip through, and let's have some fun. So again, this is going to show the performance of Q2 2025 versus 2024. And it's also going to show the trailing 6 months, okay, and how we related to last year. All right. So we're going to get a really good look at exactly what's going on. Let's start with 38 East End, which is basically Inlet Beach to Grayton. Inlet Beach to Grayton. Stops at Grayton. All right. Average price per square foot sold $880 per foot. List price to sales price ratio. Go ahead and explain that now. That is when a home is listed and then when it goes under contract, how close to the list price is it closing at? So that's a 6% discount to buyers on that, okay? Average days on the market, 115. Number of sales, 139. What does that mean? All right, let's look over last year. 139 sales in 2025. Last year, we did 176. So that's down 20%. So down in the number of transactions on 38 East End year over year by 20%. But let's look at sold volume. 2025, 369 million sold. 2024, 474 million. So down 22% on the sold volume for 38 East End. So that's right in line with the number of sales. Down 20% on the sales, the volume is going to be down 20%. But what does that mean about the sales price? Average sales price, okay? 2.659 versus 2.694 last year. Guys, it's down 1%. That's flat. So that's what we're looking at, right? So down 20% on the number of transactions. So it makes sense that the volume is going to be down, and it was the exact same number as the sold volume. So that means that the sales price stayed flat on 38 East End, okay? We're not going to get into condos. Let's look at this average days on market, 115. That's up 55% over 74 days this time last year, okay? Active listings, 563 versus 525, so up 7% on inventory, and months of inventory, 20%. So what we're looking at, guys, is like not only what are the numbers doing, but what led to that, right? So everything's, here's the point on 38 East End. They've been rolling for a long time, $880 a foot on average. That includes Alys and everything, right? You're going to get a good look at that in a second. The sales price stayed even despite the lower number of transactions. Sales price stayed even and flat despite 20% drop in the number of transactions and inventory going up. Let's see if that's the theme throughout the day. Let's go to the next. 38 West End. So now we're talking about Grayton Beach through Dune Allen area, all the way to the other end of the West End, right? $563 per foot. Now, again, I feel like I got to take up for the West End every time. Casey, the East End was $880 per foot. Why is the West End $563 a foot? Well, we've got the big five in the East End, meaning Alys Beach, Rosemary, WaterColor, WaterSound, okay, Seaside. So all those command super high price per square foot. So it drags that number for the East End up. West End is historically just single family like communities and not master developed new urbanism communities, okay? So these numbers are still really good, and we'll relate that as we keep going west. $563 per foot. List price to sales price ratio, 89%, okay? Not a lot of new construction developments in the West End as it relates to the East End. So what I mean by that is the list price to sales price ratio is always lower on the West End. So that's basically an 11% discount for buyers off of the list price on average on the West End. Average days on market, 121, right there in line. Number of sales, 68. How does that relate? 2025 Q2, 68 sales. Last year, 58 plus 17. So look at that. West End actually outperformed on the number of transactions over East End, right? Pretty interesting to look at that. Up, I'm gonna zoom in here right here to get this from me. This might be just for me. Up 17%, 68 over 58 year before. So a little bit different than what we had on East End, right? So let's look at sold volume, down 6%, right? So 91 million in 2025, 97 million in 2024. So what does that mean? Sales price, average sales price on the West End, Q2 2025, 1.34 million. Last year it was 1.67 million. So 20% decline in the sales price on the West End. Okay. I will tell you, most of the inventory that I saw on the West End was between that million and 1.5. There was a lot of stress on that segment that pushed the price down because there was so much competition. So I'm not shocked by these numbers. Let's look at average days on market. 121 currently, actually was at 133 last year. So down 9% on the average days on market currently for sales on the West End. Super interesting. Active listings, 268 versus 2. They actually lost the number of listings. So look at this. Sold more inventory, okay? Up 17% on the number of listings it sold. And look at that. Because of that, it drug the active listings down. There's actually fewer houses on the market than there were in 2024 this time on the West End. And we felt that last year. It was like, man, they just keep coming on. Well, this year, what the market numbers are saying is that we're selling through those at a good saturation rate on the West End. So we're actually up on the number of transactions and the inventory is down on the West End. This is single family homes. The reason I don't go into condos, guys, right here is look, 5 transactions. Okay. So it's very dependent on the inventory and I just don't go into that. All right. Let's keep this train rolling. So that's interesting news out of the gate on that. Let's look at Rosemary Beach. All right, what's Rosemary Beach doing? Let's see. So average sales price Q2, $1,450 per foot. List price to sales price ratio, 92%, right in line with the average on the East End. 78 days on the market. So let's see what it did over the last 6 months. So they really only had 8 transactions in 2025, 7 last year. So you see how minimal these numbers are? But look at this. Average sales price is up 15%, Rosemary Beach. So fewer transactions, smaller sample size. What I like to harp on there is that Rosemary Beach in this environment currently still doing $1,450 per foot on those transactions. Okay. Alys Beach, everybody likes to know it. Alys Beach average sales price $1,840 per foot. Look at that list price to sales price ratio, 97%. I tell you, a lot of that is new construction, so they're coming on the market as closed and showing 100%. That's not surprising. The average days on market now being higher than the average of the 38 East End in general is a bit surprising. I haven't seen that before, but they're still getting $1,840 per foot on average in Alys Beach. Okay. Seacrest Beach. This is the neighborhood that sits directly in between Seacrest and Rosemary and Alys Beach, right? So they get to enjoy all the walking, the shopping and dining. All right. But they get the benefit of the pricing. Look at that average sales price, $687 a foot. So a little bit closer to the West End because that's not a new urbanism community. So great location, still killing it. They are, let's see, their average sales price looks to be down about 8% versus last year. Yeah. 1.5 versus 1.7. Okay. WaterSound Beach coming in at an average of $1,500 a foot. So you see how these new urbanism ones are lining up? Like with, Alys at 18, 17 for Rosemary, and then, 14, and then WaterSound Beach. So WaterSound Beach, very few transactions, down 30% on the number of transactions, but we're talking about 9 versus 6. Average sales price, though, average sales price in Q2 is $7 million, up from 4.5 last year. That's a 50% increase. That's a small sample, guys. Okay. Again, I can break these individual communities down for you. Seaside, 6 transactions, average $1,400 a foot. So you see, here's the picture I'm painting for the East End. When the East End average is $880, but we're looking at Rosemary through Seaside, they're all at $1,400 a foot and up. Okay. Look at WaterColor, $968 a foot, and the average is $880. Those are leading the charge on that. Then you got Seacrest Beach in the 600s. That's where those numbers really start to get compelling. Okay. Let's see how many sales of WaterColor. 28 versus 29 last year. Man, they're right ticking along. Let's see average sales price, flat. Look at that. Average sales price, 3,535 last year, 3,549 this year. WaterColor is basically saying that in Q2 versus Q2 last year, they are basically doing around the same kind of activity, especially in the trailing 6 months, but still taking along. I see that. I watch those numbers. Origins, 511 a foot. Man, they're doing well. So let's keep going. So story is so far, listen, I guess before we get into Sandestin, the 30A, the East End was tricking along and still climbing in sales price despite the numbers. They showed flat. They showed flat in Q2 versus Q2 last year. That's the first time in over a year that we've seen the numbers on the East End stay flat. I think that's healthy, right? It's kind of balancing out everything right there. And that's what we're feeling from both the rental side and what we're seeing for the most part across the board. Let's see if that trend continues as we work through Sandestin. Sandestin, average price per square foot, 548. List price to sales price ratio, 91%. Average days on market, 85. So that's lower than what we're seeing on 38. Okay. Number of sales, 35. How does that relate to last year? 35 versus 38. So right in line. Average sales price, down about 19%, 1.2 versus 1.5. A lot of different inventory in there. So Sandestin doing fine. They're staying right where they were. Active listings down 9%. They're kind of like West End. They're not having as many houses on the market right now in Sandestin. So this is why I keep doing these numbers, guys. Like just when you feel like you want to throw a blanket over all these communities and all these areas on what's going on, you got to break it down by community. You even got to go within the community of like 38 West End. Not all communities are acting the same. You know what I mean? You cannot, like when people call me and say, Casey, how's the market? Man, that is the hardest question in the world to answer. Because look at all these different numbers. 38 West End and Sandestin acting very different than 38 East End. East End seeing inventory increases, West End seeing decreases. Guys, I mean, it's a golf cart ride from these two places, right? Burnt Pine we won't get into. We just closed a beautiful home in there. Miramar Beach. So this is like around Sandestin, but more the outlet mall area up until you get to like Destin Commons, you know, in Destin. $392 a foot. Let me say my asterisks on Miramar Beach and Destin. Do not judge it based on price per square foot. It also holds some of our oldest inventory that we have, right? So don't judge it based on that. A lot of that stuff needs renovation, going through renovation. Average price per square foot, $392. List price to sales price ratio, 93%. That's very good for Miramar Beach. That's impressive, okay? Number of days on market, 64. That's good. So look at this number of transactions, completely flat. Number of sales, 51, 2025, 51 last year. Let's look at average sales price. 865 in 2025, 1.4 last year. So that's a decrease of 40% on the average sales price. So interesting. So what's interesting is that they're holding pretty firm on their list price to sales price. Like a 7% discount to buyers is not, not a huge discount. Doesn't take them long to sell at 64 days, but the average price point is down 40%. So I think what that's telling me there, that's an inventory thing. Let's look at the active listings. 145 right now versus 119. So they're up 20%. Condos are having more sales. Condos are I'll speak on condos in Miramar Beach, but just because that's a big part of their inventory. Up 16% on the number of sales. Look at the average sales price, pretty flat, down 3%. That's pretty flat in our world. Anything plus or minus 5%, we're going to call it flat, right? So Miramar Beach is super interesting on that average sales price being down 40%, but at the same time, they've got one of our lower average days on market, and they've got one on the higher end of the list price to sales price ratio. So they're not negotiating as much, but yet the sales price is down. When I see that, it's an inventory thing. Because if you're having success with the sales and you're getting it within 7% of your asking price in 60 days, it's got to be the types of homes and stuff that are on the market. That doesn't mean the market's dropped 40% on the sales price in Miramar Beach. That lets me know it's an inventory thing versus what it was this time last year. Because they're selling and they're doing it fairly quickly in this marketplace. Destin, here we go. Again, big disclaimer, $399 per foot on average. So look at where Man, y'all know this area. I mean, it's not that far from Alys to Destin. We're talking $1,800 a foot versus $399 on average, right? Like that's the world we live in. I love it. But that's why everybody can find something down here. It's fantastic. What are you looking for? We'll find it, right? 89% list price to sales price ratio. Okay, on the lower end, but that's in line. 115 days on market, super average. Okay, 64 sales. Let's see how that related. Flat, down 2% from last year. Sold volume, up 1%. Okay, so right there, so what does that mean about sales price? 958 in 2025 versus 938. It's actually up 2%. Let's see what that inventory is doing. Active listings, 195 currently in Destin, up 34%. So I'm gonna give Destin credit. Let's see what the average days on market. 115 versus 81, up 42. So Destin is up 40% on the days on market. Active listings are up 34%. But listen to this, the average sales price is pretty flat, up 2%. So you see all these rules I'm saying? Like if I just told you Destin was up 40% on the listings and days on market, what would your reaction to that be? Like if I were interviewing people on the street, they'd be like, oh man, I bet they're getting killed on the sales side. And then what it shows you is the average sales price is even and the number of sales is even. Super interesting, right? Like this is the challenge with throwing these blanket rules over real estate, especially in an inventory like Destin that has so many. So they're seeing the inventory rise. It's taking longer to sell them, but they're holding firm on the price. Really interesting. As an average on sale, but they're negotiating 11% with the buyers, right? Got to look at all this stuff. Let's look at Panama City Beach. This one's always interesting because it's so condo heavy. We actually lead with Gulfront condos at the top of this list. Average price per square foot, $450 per foot, okay? List price to sales price ratio, 91%. That's not bad. It's not the lowest. We saw 87. It's right there in line. Average days on market, 127. Number of transactions, 127. Let's see how that related. 127 number of sales, Q2 2025. What we do last year, 151. That's down 16%. Okay, Panama City Beach, Gulfront condos. Sold volume, 61 million this year, 78 million last year, down 20%. Okay, so what does that mean? Average sales price. Average sales price in 2025 Q2, 484. Last year, 517. So down 6%. So overall, average sales price, not bad. It's just the number of sales is down 16% and drug the sold volume down. Let's see about that inventory. Active listings, 683 Gulfront condos for sale in Panama City Beach. Last year, this time, 619. So they're up 10%. That's honestly not bad. For that kind of volume, that's not bad. Average days on market, 127 versus 89. That's up 40%. So here's the story in Panama City Beach. It's taking them longer to sell, all right? And average sales prices come down about 6% because of it, on average, right? But that's what happens when I talk to a lot of people about this. That's really one of the biggest difference between areas and communities that are very condo heavy versus single family homes. Condos are condos for the most part, because what happens is you have these large buildings. It could be between a 2 and a 3 bedroom. It could be different paint color on the walls or different kind of counters, but you can have mass amounts of sales that are virtually kind of around the same thing, right? 1,000 to 1,400 square feet, tall buildings, a big building has a run. So a lot of the inventory kind of stays right there with each other, right? When you're looking at mainly single family homes, especially like what we look at on 30A that has very little condo opportunities, you have these vast disparities between price points as you go along, right? So what I'm saying is, when you look at Panama City Beach, it's a great example of a condo heavy market and how we evaluate those and kind of how it all kind of goes together, right? But you look at 30A and what I was saying about small amounts of condos, single family homes, man, the comps, the average sales price can change so much in a quarter based on the inventory and the types of homes that people add in pools to them. And a street over can be a drastically different change, right? So that's why when we see 38 East and West, it can completely flip-flop from a 38 West, which seemed like the average sales price on 38 West was going to continue to go up no matter how many homes were coming on the market and how long it took to sell them. And what happened in Q2 was everything started flattening out, which was kind of expected, right? It felt like that. Rentals are kind of flattening out. Everything's kind of flattening out. There's still some incredible price points going on out there, right? But it flattened out as a whole. But the West End saw an increase. Super interesting. But what happened is they had downward pressure on the number of listings. 38 West End last year had this huge push on listings. We just came off of a quarter where they saw some of that get taken away, finally, with some of the sales happening. I relate that to some of the sellers getting real about the pricing. They were able to move the inventory, and we haven't seen a huge influx of inventory coming back on the market. If you watch my market update every Monday, that's been a pattern. We're now on trend where we're seeing a much lower amount of inventory hit the market as a whole and staying super consistent on the pendings. So what is that doing? It's taken away from that inventory count, right? It's not bursting up anything, but it's kind of leveling the playing field. So we're getting very predictable. We're able to get better reads on what the pricing should be, what it takes to move a property. But listen, here's the main point I like for you guys to get out of this every time, and why I take the time to go down through the entire market as a whole, even break down the specific neighborhoods. Item number one, we are facts over feelings, right? All the time. When the neighbor comes up to you and say, hey, I heard it's hot, I heard it's cold, I heard it's dead. You've got numbers. You can go back and watch this. If you live on the West End, give them the numbers. Actually, Steve, Bob, Betty, they actually had lower inventory come on, and they saw a little bit of an increase in the price point. That's the kind of stuff I want you guys saying. But the reason point number two, it is impossible for any agent anywhere, especially in our market, or me, to give you a blanket summary on, Casey, how's the market? They need to ask, what specifically are you asking about? Because within a mile, it gets very, very, very different down here because of how diverse our inventory is, okay? So that's the main takeaway. So those two. And the other one is, we are doing transactions every day. You can see the number of sales. Nobody's giving anything away. The lowest on average list price to sales price ratio that we saw on average was 87%, which is a 13% discount for buyers. But if you talk to the marketplace, I've heard people saying, man, I heard sellers are just kind of like negotiating like crazy. They're just giving it away. Listen, there ain't no 50% list price to sales price ratios going on out there. I can promise you, right? But buyers, let's be real. This is the first time you've had these consistency numbers out there as an opportunity to come in there and find something that makes sense. And as you can see by the numbers, buyers are taking advantage of it. But in some pockets, sellers are able to hold firm. Take, for instance, 38 West End. So listen, here's the main point. We are putting together transactions. We see it every week. If you're not watching our weekly update, we track it each Monday, letting you know exactly what's going on. And you had a good heads up on this before I even rolled through these numbers. You could probably tell me a little bit what's going on. But the reason I like to take these on a very macro and kind of show you as a whole and take each neighborhood, and I guess I get micro too, right? Macro, micro, is to show you just in general, while we talk about it each week and we're looking at it as a broad, when we dive into each neighborhoods or each segment of the road, like 38 East and West, you really dive into truly what's going on and you can paint the picture and tell the story. Here's what I'm saying. We're going to keep rolling. I think all these are going to flatten out on pricing. I think the amount of inventory is going to continue to flatten out and go down in some spots. Okay. I'm expecting production through the end of the year exactly like what's going on right now. Not super highs, not super lows, not a big rush of inventory. Not super highs, not super lows, not a big rush of inventory. We're getting a feel for where the pricing needs to be. The buyers are comfortable with it. And depending on what Mr. Powell does in the last couple of quarters of this year, there's a lot of buyers out there on the fence. We're going to produce. By these numbers, we're going to produce through the end of the year. When I come back to you with Q3, I think the numbers are going to show it. Okay? That's my prediction across the board. All right. Listen, appreciate you hanging in with me. I enjoy doing this. Open invitation. If you saw a segment that you'd like for me to break down even further, I can break it down 30A Alys Beach, north side versus south side. I'll do whatever you need me to, okay? That's the point of this exercise. We look at this every day. We like to bring it to you so you know what's going on. Be the most educated out there. Ask me any questions you need. And appreciate you and look forward to speaking to you again soon.